Hey y'all, and welcome back to Joey's Booked. Today we are going to be talking about my worst books of 2024. I hated every moment of it. It did not deliver. It was dumb. The whole concept was just dumb. I don't know, rant done on that one. Bella, this was one of the most confusing things I think I have ever read. I could rant on this one. I just really disliked it. Such a disappointment of a collection. My jaw was on the floor, but not in a good way, because that book just made me angry because it was dumb. I couldn't stand it. I really hate all these books. I'm particularly excited to talk about some of my worst of the year, because there is nothing I love more than a good rant. I'm gonna go ahead and put the whole disclaimer thing out there of if some of these books are ones that you love or whatever, these are just my opinions, but at the same time, I want to rant. So if you're gonna be real upset and a book you love comes up, maybe don't listen. These are things that I've hated that I've read this year. These are books, some of that I wish I hadn't read, and some of them are just problematic. There's a wide range. I really sat down, and it's a lot of my 1.5 and 1-star books, which I'm not going to be going into all the ratings and stuff. Some of them just, they had to make the list anyways. One in particular that, regardless of what I rated it, I have a lot to say. So, with all of that said though, let's go ahead and get into my top 10 worst books. So I'm going to be starting with my number 10 spot and going up into my number 1 worst book of the year. In my number 10 spot, we have None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is one of the worst thrillers I've read this year. This is one of the worst books I've read this year, and it has me terrified to ever consider picking up another Lisa Jewell. I read this in a video that will be linked down below of where I did a Tabby read, which was where me and my friend Tabitha, who helps out with the channel behind the scenes a lot, decided to buddy read this, as she's a big fan of thrillers and she had read some Lisa Jewell before, I believe. And we both hated this book. We thought it was trash. And well, I'll say the title is pretty accurate of nothing that goes on in the book hardly is true. In this, we are following Josie, and she is a woman who just doesn't have a happy life, whether from her past or whatever else, and she finds this woman who is her birthday twin, who also runs a podcast, and approaches her and is like, I want you to tell the story of my life on your podcast, and we can disguise it as this whole birthday twin thing. It just kind of sets out between these two women from there, and it wasn't good. This is solidified for me that I really am just not a fan of domestic type thrillers. It was just bad. I didn't like the writing. I didn't think the twists were twisting. I didn't like the outcome of a lot of what the twists were. I thought the ending was not good, and I would love to be more descriptive on that, but like I said, you can check that out in our full discussion from our Tabby read. In the 9th spot of my worst books of the year is The Unmothers by Leslie J. Anderson. Now, I believe I read this in November, so you wouldn't have gotten a wrap-up with me really talking about this. This was a really highly anticipated book for me. I love the cover. I love the idea of the weird folk stuff was being suggested in here, and it didn't work. In this, we are following, I believe her name was Marshall, and Marshall is grieving the death of her husband, and she's a reporter, and she's been sent to this small town to investigate the rumors of a horse giving birth to a healthy baby human boy. And that screamed weird folk stuff you should read. It did not deliver. I almost feel bad putting it on my worst, because there were parts of this that had promise and that could have led into things that I would have wanted, but I didn't like the twist, and it just really became this slow mystery. And the biggest issue was the amount of unnecessary POVs that made this really confusing. It's all flooding back to me as I talk about it. There were so many POVs in this book. I don't even know how many there were at this point. I know it was over 10. And it was hard to keep up with who was who. I was checked out about halfway through because it just didn't make me care. I was not interested in whatever was going on once it started getting discussed. There was some folk aspects to it, but they weren't what I wanted them to be. And it was one of my probably not only worst books of 24, but it was definitely in my most disappointing books of 24. Mentioning little disappointments, someone here has been ruining all of my filming I've been trying to do to get caught up on content. Please leave your sister alone. He's not really a disappointment. Go away. In our 8th spot, which was also another really disappointing book for me, and one of the few books that I haven't enjoyed from one of my all-time favorite authors is going to be We Can Never Leave This Place by LaRocca. For such a short little novella, this was one of the most confusing things I think I have ever read, and I just didn't really understand what was going on the whole book. It was like this weird horror fairy tale, and LaRocca is known for having just like gorgeous writing and like artistic writing and stuff, which is great. I didn't understand this. I could not tell you now what this was about any more than whenever I wanted to read it the first time. I don't know. All I remember is there was a girl and they're poor and questionably in like something war-torn, like war and bombing or something, and then there's a spider who marries her mother or gets with her mother or moves in, and I don't know. It was weird. I didn't get it, and it had a lot of promise just to not make any sense to me. And yet, somehow, it still wasn't my worst of the year. And then number 7, this was a library book from earlier in the year. Even though there were parts of it I really enjoyed, and I could tell you what happened, I didn't like it because it was problematic. And that's going to be Indian Burial Ground by Medina. I was so excited for this book because I loved when I got an arc a year or two ago of Sisters of the Lost Nation, and I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the representation and the conversation Sisters of the Lost Nation brought up. And this book it doesn't follow the same characters, but it's like on the same reservation. And we are following these kids that just are like, there's this situation, and there was like this kind of back and forth thing either with missing people or something like that, but there was some questionably supernatural thing and like a who killed this person kind of thing. And I don't remember everything because I don't have it in front of me. Which, that's fine. I wouldn't read it anyways, because there was a part of this book that was so incredibly fat-phobic, I couldn't stand it. Like, it wasn't just like, there was a big overweight character and some people talked down to him. No. There was a twist in the book involving someone who was severely overweight that infuriated me. It infuriated me, and it made me so mad that, like, I'm questioning now whether to pick up another book if he writes another one set in the same area, because it took an author I was really loving and anticipating and made me question what exactly we were writing. I read a lot of old stuff that has a lot of these problematic things in it, especially in things like Stephen King. But like, in a modern day, new release type setting, it was not okay. It ruined the entire thing. The plot wasn't even that interesting as it was like in the first book. I didn't really care about the mystery. I didn't care about the questionably supernatural stuff going on. I was really bored throughout it, and it didn't work. But that ending, I don't know, rant done on that one. This is only book 7. So we're about to really get into some not so good books. Number 6 on this list is probably actually my most ranted about book of the year. Grief is for People by Sloane Crosley. This book is a memoir. I am about to sit here and tear apart someone's life. And if that doesn't sit well with you, I'm sorry. I don't necessarily rate memoirs normally on the person's life itself. But this read like some weird lit fic. Sounds like it would be the perfect kind of memoir for me, because we are following Sloane's story of her friend who she used to work with in publishing that passed away from suicide. And in the first section, when we start talking about all that, I was like, okay, yeah, I can get behind this. And the writing wasn't horrible or anything. And then Sloane started talking about some other stuff in her life happening. And there was all of these connections to the loss of her friend and comparing it to jewelry, which I understand they were family heirlooms. We were talking about a human life, and we were making it the equivalent of some lost jewelry. And then Sloane starts talking about this encounter with what I believe it was the Jewish mafia, or a Jewish gang or something like that. And the entire storyline of this experience felt like one of the most ridiculous things I have ever heard. My jaw was on the floor, but not in a good way, because it was there is no way. It's a memoir, so if she did, she did. But it felt like a weird lit fic twist where some person just walks in and things get really unhinged out of nowhere. And that was only a small portion of this book, but it lost me from there. And then it just continued with these weird analogies and things like that. And I don't know, I just felt like it was almost distasteful to the person that she was grieving. And that's not my place to say. Do I recognize that? Yes. Is that how I felt? Yes. My partner also read this. That's the whole reason I even picked this up, is because they were interested in it. And they had the same feelings. They have laughed about it with me. This has been our example of just not a good book all year. And the fact that I read this in the first half of the year and I haven't unhauled it yet baffles me. And I am so excited to finally get rid of this book, because it has just been a rant all year. And this is not what I would recommend for a grief memoir. There are better ones out there. Sloane, I'm sorry if I just tore apart your life or I ruined any credibility on myself, but this memoir was not it. Our number 5 spot is a book that I have unhauled at the very beginning of the year. I read this back in, I think, February. And that is Out There Screaming, which was a collection put together by Jordan Peele. Such a disappointment of a collection. Every short story in this book felt like it was just written to give him movie ideas. And there were some authors I've read from before. There were some new authors that I could see a lot of potential in, but the stories just did not hit for me. I DNF'd half of the stories in the collection because I just didn't like them. I would get a good way into them. It wasn't I was just doing it on the first page. I didn't like them. There was 1 or 2 stories that I really enjoyed out of the whole collection. It put me in a slump, and it's made me really question if I can enjoy anthologies, because there's been a few more I've read since then that I've also not enjoyed, and I've read some short stories I like. But as a anthology of mixed authors, I'm starting to shy away from them, because this book left such a bad taste in my mouth. I remember a few months later I picked up Never Whistle at Night, which was the Indigenous anthology. But I had a similar experience, and that was one that I was so excited about because I heard so many good things about that collection. And this one just, Out There Screaming, it wasn't for me. It just felt like a way to get some movie ideas. Book 4 is going to actually be 2 books tied together because they are from the same author. And the fact that these are only 4, number 4 on my list, is astounding to me because I have complained about them so much. And that is going to be both Eileen and especially my Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. I have realized this year that Ottessa Moshfegh is not the weird girl lit fic and unlikable characters that works for me. And I have read both weird girl stuff and I've read unlikable stuff that has really worked for me. These were not good. I'm not even going to go into the full synopsis of these at this point because this is, you can go back and see either my December wrap up where I talk about Eileen. I don't even remember what month I read my Year of Rest and Relaxation in, but it was even worse. These characters, I can't stand being in their head. There's nothing redeeming in the storyline or in its themes to make it worth being in these characters' head. Eileen, I could not stand the mentions of the main character's crevices and folds or talking about someone's nether regions. That, more than anything, just, it was so cringy and it was constant. And then in my Year of Rest and Relaxation, I couldn't take the therapist seriously. And there were some really accurate depictions of depression and stuff in here that was fine. And then the ending was such a throwaway. And it was just such a way to use something that shouldn't have been used to be impactful. And it just didn't sit well with me the way it was used. I could rant and rant and rant on this one. We're just going to say Ottessa Moshfegh in general is not for me. And will I pick up another one of her books for easy reading? Hopefully not. Is it possible? You never know. In the number 3 spot is going to be another controversial one. And that's going to be The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is my number 3 least favorite book of the year, among some really rough books. And if you would have, told me I was reading it this year, I probably would have laughed. But 2, if you would have told me that it was as bad for me as it was, I would not have believed it because of how popular this book is. I read this because I'm a teacher, and one of my students was reading this for one of their English classes, and sometimes I like to pick up the books. And even sometimes race my students on which of us can read the book quicker, but still get through it, not unhealthily. And this one's super short, so I sat down and I put in the audio, and I followed along, and I read it in one sitting. I hated every moment of it. The first 30 pages, I understand when this was written, but there was one character that was making some racist remarks that just already didn't sit well with me, and I was starting to get checked out, and the further I got into it, the less I cared. I feel like listening to it on audio, at one point I just stopped following along in the physical. And then I was falling asleep. I was so uninterested in everything going on. And I've read classics that I've enjoyed. Not as many as I'm starting to figure out that I don't enjoy. I didn't care. And then there's one of the big twists towards the end, if you've read this, with Gatsby. I didn't like the way that was done. I didn't think it was very well portrayed, even for an older book. Lots of things just didn't sit well. I had to go back and listen through some things to make sure I understood them correctly because I was dozing and felt like I was sleeping through so much of that audiobook. It just wasn't good. I really didn't like it. I don't think this is a good required reading we see a lot in schools. I don't know if I'll pick up any more Fitzgerald if this is how he writes. There's other classic authors I'd rather try more. My number 2 worst book, so the second book, and yet again, somehow, not my top book. The Stranger Upstairs by Lisa M. Matlin. This ending made me so mad. I was already not super into this. We're talking, there's a woman and there's weird stuff happening in the house kind of thing. And then there's something going on. There was a lot happening in it. I've zoned out a lot on what this was about. I know she moves into a home where someone was murdered before, and then weird things start happening or something, and it's a thriller though. The twist in this was another one where I did not like the twist. It made me angry again, and this one wasn't even that it was distastefully dumb, it was just dumb. Like, that was what all of this was about the whole time. And I know in the author's note they were like trying to raise awareness over like what happens, but it didn't work. It didn't work. That is not the way to do it. It was, I just really disliked it. Would not recommend this. Another thriller that didn't work for me and could have had promise and then just went off the rails really fast. Didn't like the characters, didn't like the story, that twist. One of the worst twists I've ever read in anything. And my number one worst book of the year, which if you have heard me talk about this before, will probably not be that big of a surprise. I don't own this book. I read it on audio on a road trip at one point. Hide by Kiersten White. This book is notoriously a lot of people's, like, in their worst from previous years when it came out. I don't know if I've ever heard great reviews on it, but I don't think I fully understood what it was. Basically, in this, we are following this woman, that is not her name, but we're going to call her Susie. And Susie is, like, homeless, and she has gotten this chance to go on this reality TV show that's taking part at, like, this abandoned amusement park, and whoever wins can win, like, a lot of money or something. Cool, whatever. Kind of felt testy for something I'm here to read, but it was going to be a quick road trip book. The competition is hide and seek. It is called Hide because these people are sent to an abandoned music park to play hide and seek. And if that does not sound like one of the worst reality competition shows in general I have ever heard of, because it's whoever can hide the longest without being found. Already boring, especially for a horror book. And then the twists in it come out of such a left field, and it's like, what does this have to do with anything? And the second half could have been a possibly promising type of story if it had anything to do with anything. It was ridiculous. Nothing about a hide and seek competition told me it was going to take the turn it was. That was dumb to begin with. There was some weird Insta love stuff happening that had no place in the book, and it really made no sense. And the more I read, even if it's just a side plot, this Insta love stuff is getting obnoxious in some of these stories. But it just did it not in a way that worked. And it was dumb. The whole concept was just dumb. That's all there was to it. And then it just got worse as it went, and I hated every moment of it. That one's at least far enough gone. I'm realizing I've really disassociated myself from it some, and I've read so many better things this year that that book just made me angry because it was dumb. And I don't know what else to say. If you enjoy that book, that is great. I think it is one of the worst written books I have ever read. I think it is one of the worst written concepts I have ever read. So with all of that said, these have been my worst books of 2024. If you have made it this far in the video, please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you like to hear my ramblings on books I didn't enjoy, which is a lot different for me. If you would like to comment down below, why don't you let me know what was the worst book you've read this year? Or even tell me why. Just no spoilers. Look out for my best books of 2024, because while I did not enjoy these, there has been some great books this year. Thank you again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.